All right. That said, let me talk a little bit about what the format of this class is. I put it out in an email that I sent to everybody. So I just want to set your expectations in case this isn't what you want. This is a seminar style. I'm going to be just talking about some things on IPv6. I've got a lot of organized materials, things I'm going to be sharing with you. But I'm approaching it very differently than the way like I wrote my books. And this probably will be another IPv6 book at some point. Just a different way of doing it. But so there won't be any exams or anything that you got to turn in, no labs or anything like that. But I'll make everything available for you that I have. So first of all, here's the Canvas page. I want to kind of get through this quickly so I can get to get to really what I want to talk about today. Hiding behind here. Where did IPv4? Where did all the addresses go? I'm really excited to talk about this. This is going to give you some pro tip knowledge that a lot of people really don't know. They know we're out, but what's that mean? Where do they go? We'll get there. We'll get there. All right. So here's the course information, the Zoom link here. For every class, you'll see down here, like today, I'll put the recording for today's class right there. And for each class after that will be under the right module. Something you may be interested in. This here is the PDF. We open this up. You can download this. So it's something we just open it up just like that. This is to, where is it? Oh, that's the PDF to the second edition of my IPv6 book. It's a thick book. And it's got about a third of the book is, maybe half the third of the book is, almost half the book is routing protocol stuff, which I don't think really needed to be in there at the time. At the time, there wasn't a lot of other stuff. Boy, are you opening up or what? Let me see if I can. At the time, there wasn't a lot of stuff out on it. So, let's see. This is download. Maybe try that. Okay. Yeah, done. There we go. So you can open up that. There we go. Okay, so it's the PDF to the book. The other thing I ask you to do is not to share it. I don't personally care. I just don't want my publisher to get upset with me. So anyway, you're going to see there's a lot in here. This is basically I wrote this book kind of a, everything you need to know about IPv6 in one place. Okay, so there's a lot of detail. So you have access to that. The other thing I want to mention that you have access to, I have some videos here, but I also have a IPv6 playlist, and that's right here. A lot of this is based on my book and also on a live lessons video series I did for Pearson Publishing, Cisco Press. It's actually I think it's better than the the video series I did for Cisco Press, and I've actually had a lot of people contact me that this is what they use to get going on IPv6, and people at Cisco even. So anyway, so there's a lot of stuff here that you can use as well. Okay. But no, I'm not just going to point you to these, but there's a lot of stuff here that you can have access to. And that goes along with the book. I believe these chapter numbers coincide with the book, if I remember correctly. Okay, added some other cool videos in there we'll talk about throughout. I've got some Python code I'll talk about later. So that's kind of the videos, about the book. You have access to the PDF. You don't need to buy the book. Okay, really, I'm not trying to sell books. And if I could, I'd just give away the books. But you've got the PDF. You got my YouTube playlist. There's some other resources I'll talk about later. IPv6 Buzz podcast, packet pushers, things. Talk about IPv6 in the news, some stuff. We'll talk about that as we get there. There's some check your understanding questions. They're just little questions, nothing really major. If you want to kind of, as we go through these topics, you want a little check your understanding, how well you know something. Like there's like 10 questions each. By the way, yeah. Oh, it should be published. No, it's public. Is anybody seeing this course in Canvas?
I hadn't seen it yet, Rick.
No, it's not showing up. I sent you an email this morning.
Why isn't it showing up? Wow.
Yeah, it still shows as unpublished.
There we go, because I didn't publish it. There we go. Now you should see it. Thank you. Yeah. You know, this little thing here, I see unpublished, like, okay, do I click on that because it's unpublished, but it's telling me that it's unpublished? Okay, thank you. All right, now you should see it. Now you should see it. All right, so that's the check your understandings. And then this is where we're gonna start today. So I'll put the recording right here for today. And I just wanna get going on this. We're gonna talk about kind of an overview of this course. We're gonna talk about the protocol. We're gonna talk about, there's a lot going on with IPv6. People think it's just larger, more address space. That's just part of it. It was also an opportunity to have have some things redone, done a little differently. One of the big differences, and we'll talk about this later, don't worry about it now. One of the big differences with IPv6 is no broadcast addresses. It uses multicast. And that's something we don't dive into very much in a lot of our courses. And frankly, a lot of people don't have a great understanding of what that really means as far as client devices. We'll get a good understanding of exactly what that means and why that's something better than a broadcast, even though your device might be receiving the same information. Don't worry about what that is right now. Why it's better sometimes in multicast form than broadcast. So we'll get there a little later. But in essence, a lot of the things that we'll be covering some things from this video. We'll be spending some time on IPv6 address representation. I have separate PowerPoints for all this, but how to look at an IPv6 address. It is easier, believe it or not, than IPv4. We'll talk about different types of addresses, including the global unicast address. Okay. Matter of fact, if I show you my address right now that I am connected to you with, and hopefully, yes, I did connect to the right connection here, right cable. Let me bring something up. I will point you to that. I am talking to you right now over IPv6. This is my IPv6 address. Matter of fact, yes, even on Zoom, I am connecting with you on IPv6. Okay. So we'll talk about different types of addresses. The global unicast will understand what the link local address is about. Again, more information about multicasts. We're also going to spend some time talking about how devices obtain IPv6 addresses automatically. One of those is stateless address auto configuration, which is something IPv4 does not do. So we'll talk about the significance of that. It does also use DHCP, and we'll get into some other things as well, like ARP, but it's called Neighbor Discovery, and how that works. Let's get started, because I actually want to get into this stuff starting today. So I'm going to start with IPv4. Where did all the IPv4 addresses go? I don't know if we'll get started with how did IPv6 become the next IP? That's an interesting story as well. So let's get started. I'm very excited about this. I don't know if you can tell. And I'm not just saying that. I think this is very, to me, insightful. Okay, because a lot of people don't understand, really, we know we're out of IPv4 addresses. Okay, where did they go? What does that mean? Why did that happen? How did that happen? Okay, so sometime between 2011 and 2015, IANA, I'm going to talk about who they are in a moment, but they're the ones that the primary holder of all IPv4 and IPv6 addresses. They ran out kind of a couple of different phases. And the regional internet registries, we'll talk more about them in a moment. Those are those 5 global areas that allocate IP addresses, V4 and V6, to different organizations, ISPs, companies in their region. So within that time frame, that's when the depletion really happened. So let's step back. So I think this is cool stuff, and it's good knowledge. This will give you a perspective of how things happen and how we got to where we are. You know, a lot of times people are quick to criticize technologies, protocols, even people involved in this, but they don't understand why all this happened, and you know when and why it occurred. So let's talk about the first RFCs that were developed by John Postel. First of all, we got to remember during this time, we're talking the 1980s, early 1980s, 1970s before this. The TC, and we're going to talk more about this in the next lecture, IPv6, how it became the next internet protocol. It's not a foregone conclusion. There are other protocol suites besides TCP/IP that were vying to become the protocol suite of whatever we were going to call this internet thing. Maybe there wouldn't just be one protocol suite. Maybe we'd have different types of internets using different protocols. So there's a lot of different protocol suites being developed, including ones from IBM, OSI, and also this TCP/IP. So first of all, IPv4. The RFCs for this were written by John Postel. That's a name that we should actually, we don't hear much about him. I mean, those in the industry from far back, old like Rick, know this name. But a lot of times now we all think of Vince Cerf. Talk about him in a moment. But the first two IP version 4 RFC requests for comments happened in 1980 and 1981. John Postel wrote them. Okay, what happened to version 0 through 3? These were experimental protocols. And this whole protocol suite, which was being designed by Vince Cerf and Bob Kahn at the time, just kind of an experiment. But John Postel had a lot to do with shaping the current infrastructure protocols that we use today in TCP/IP. Okay, so John Postel, there's a nice little, I'll put these, make sure these links are on Canvas. This talks about John Postel. This is a article written, Aaron is a regional internet registry for North America. Jonathan Weisman is someone I've known for a number of years that does a lot of stuff, writing a lot of stuff on IPv6. But Vince Cerf and Bob Kahn, they're credited with being the fathers of the internets, quote unquote. They co-designed the TCP/IP suite of protocol, one of many suites of protocols being designed at the time. But John Postel had a lot to do with how these things actually got implemented. So let's talk about IPv4. This is what it looks like since 1981. Okay, that's the IPv4 header. The source and destination addresses are 32-bit addresses. That gives us 4.29 billion addresses. So if I had 32 0 bits incremented to 32 1 bits, that would be 4.29 billion addresses. Okay, and this is how we write the addresses. We write them out We divide each 8 bits into a byte or an octet and write it out as a decimal number. It really has not, it has little to do with the decimal numbers. Although we'll see, they kind of they thought, oh, let's take advantage of kind of this first octet, this first decimal number, and how we divide up these networks. Talk about that in a moment. Okay, so who assigns IPv4 addresses and IPv6? IANA. IANA is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. Okay, they actually come under the Internet Society, which is the management and legal entity of the Internet. But IANA is really not only responsible for assigning IP addresses, but actually any kind of unique identifier that is the Internet networking and Internet TCP/IP is involved with. So that includes IPv4 and IPv6 addresses. They're also, you don't have to, this is kind of a side note, just to know they do more than just IP. They actually also manage what's known as the root zone of the DNS. So things like .com, .org, whatever, okay, they manage that. They also manage protocol assignments. You know all those port numbers, like port 80 and port 443 and all those different port numbers for TCP and UDP, they manage that. All those well-known and other types of port numbers. So they're responsible for that. Now, the functions, you might hear this now and then, but their functions are administered by ICANN, which is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. So that's kind of the structure of all this. Okay, this is a great website. Okay, but a lot of people have no idea what this website is, but we will. Okay, so this here is how IANA assigned IPv4. Okay, and what we see here is a lot of these, everything's a /8. We're gonna talk more about that in a moment. Okay, and then we see these things over here like allocated, legacy, even things like, let's get down here. Administered by. Okay, this really shows where all the IPv4 addresses went, and we're gonna spend some time looking at this. Okay, gives us great insight to actually what happened. I love this stuff because this is great inside knowledge. A lot of people that that have been doing this for years have really no understanding of this. I think it's very cool. So let's first take a look at it like this. My barrel of apples. If I had 4.29 billion apples, okay, how could I allocate those apples? Okay, well, I could put them in 256 baskets of 16 million apples each. So hopefully, especially those in my CS81 class right now, you recognize that these are different /8 networks, okay? And I left out 000. I should have put that in there. So quad 0 all the way to 255,000. Okay? These are all where the first number represents the network. The last 3 numbers represent the host portion of that network. Over 16 million apples, over 16 million addresses per network. That's what all these /8s are. So let me go back up here. That's what we're seeing here, all these /8s. Talk more about this in just a moment. I'll make that a little bigger so you can see. Yeah, that's better. Okay. See these? These are all the individual baskets. Okay, so if my network was starting with 32 0 bits, okay, if I wanted to show you the 256 networks from the 0, there's the quad 0 network, 1 network, 2 network, 3 network. This is all the network. This is the network portion of the address. This is the host portion. So here it is in binary. Okay. So here we have 256 networks from the 0 to the 255. Each one of them has 24 bits in the host portion. That's over 16 million host hosts for each one of these networks. Okay. So here's the three network. Okay. The first host would be all zeros and a one. And we just keep on incrementing 2, 3, 4. If I kept on going to the very last host, all ones and a zero, there's my broadcast. So this is if we had one large network, and this was the network address with this mask. Okay. So this gives me, including the all zeros network address and the all ones broadcast address, 16,777,216 addresses. Okay. Can't use the all zeros network address, can't use the all ones broadcast. So we got to remove those. But the rest of them, if this was a single network, it's a lot of hosts. Okay. All right. So here's all the networks. We have 256 networks when we divide it like this, each one with over 16 million hosts each. Okay. So that's how we got to this, or how we got to take that and we got to the binary. Okay, is this making sense? We have 256 networks, each one with 16 million hosts. How are we doing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let's look at these baskets. So here's the baskets from quad 0 to 255, or I should say just 0 to 255. Okay. Now you're going to see over here, I've got a little legend here. We'll talk about that. And this is what we're going to be building up to. Okay. This is a good legacy, IANA, and whoever assigned, that's the group that assigned these addresses. And these are the 5 regional internet registries that we'll be talking about. Okay. 256 networks with over 16 million hosts each. Okay. Now, in the early days, so remember this protocol was released around 1981 to about 1993. Okay. What happened was legacy. So this is where we get into where you see where it says legacy. Who are some of these, legacies? DOD, AT&T, got some other ones here, DSI North, PSI Net. Let's talk about who these, so these are all the blocks of addresses that got allocated between 1981 and 1993. These were just given out. Okay. We call these, or they now refer to them as legacy. These were groups of addresses, either entire /8 blocks, and we'll talk about that in a moment. These here were all given out like one block, like I gave John or John this whole block of addresses, the 6000/8, or I gave Pamela the 54000/8. Each one got, every one of you got 16 million plus addresses. Okay. These down here we'll talk about here in a moment. You didn't get a whole block you get a portion of this block. We'll talk about that in a moment. But these were assigned. Most of these were all assigned between 1981 and 1993. This is before the creation of these regional internet registries. Talked a little bit about that already in my classes, in my previous class, but if you're not familiar with that, we'll get there here in just a moment, before the regional internet registries were created. These were given out to organizations, governments, universities, without any real oversight or look at how we can efficiently allocate these addresses. Got to remember, nobody really cared. First of all, this is kind of an experimental protocol suite. Like everybody was kind of vying, whether it was OSI or IBM or somebody else saying, this is, TCP/IP was, becoming a popular protocol suite in the 1980s, but wasn't a foregone conclusion that this was going to be the internet protocol suite. So these addresses were pretty much just given out. And even today, like these here remain under the control, and most of these all here too, under the original holders, whoever got them back between 1981 and 1993. Okay. Some of these, as we'll see, have been brought under the control of regional internet registries just for their control, but still pretty much the same people that got all these addresses in this time period still have them. Okay. So today, these blocks are pretty valuable in a lot of ways. They're owned by, you know, ownership. I'm trying, you know, maybe not the best word to use, but these companies have these addresses and can do what they want with them. Okay. That's a lot of the IPv4 addresses, if you haven't noticed already. Okay. That's a lot of them, isn't it? This is 1993. The internet, as we know it today with the World Wide Web and web browsers and everybody wanting to get on the internet, was just beginning to happen. But we're not yet done yet, as we'll see. First of all, let me mention, here are some of the legacy owners. So you see some big companies, universities. Of course, we'll talk about why the US government was heavily involved in that as well. Okay. So between 1981 and 1986, IANA. Okay. So IANA also reserves several of these blocks, some for special purposes, such as the 10 block here is part of the RFC 1918 net private IPv4 addressing space. Also part of the 172 and 192 blocks, if we found those, 172 and 192, where are you, 192, right there. Some of that block was reserved for private IPv4 addresses. Also, this entire block here, starting with 224 to 239, was reserved for multicast, and 240 to 255 was set aside for future use and research. Okay. So, if we put all that together, look at up until the early 1990s, from really 1981 to about 1993, here's our current IPv4 address allocation. This is before they realized, this is about, you know, at the time they were going to realize, about 1992, they realized, this is becoming popular. We're starting to run out. So if you look out at these 256 blocks, that's what we call these baskets or networks, call them blocks of addresses. 92 of them, 36%, were all given out to early adopters of this whole internet TCP IP. Okay. IANA got another 35 blocks here, but all these down here, another 14% of the available IPv4 address space. So combined between them, about 127 out of 256 blocks of addresses were already allocated, 50%. This is before the internet really began to take off. So you start off with 4.29 billion addresses, and now when this thing becomes popular, you realize you have about half that to give the rest of the world. Okay? So you can see that early on there was like, oh, yeah, we got to be a little bit more careful about how we allocate addresses. Okay? How are we doing? Got a little bit further to go here. Just the beginning of this, what I think is a fascinating story. Okay, so first of all, does this mean IANA allocated 256 networks, the ones that we saw, each one with 16 million hosts each? Well, not quite. So what they did was this. They used something called classful IPv4 addressing that we don't use anymore. Okay, what they did is said, okay, we're going to break up these groups of addresses. Okay, I'm going to talk about this here. Okay, we're gonna say that from the quad 0 to 223, these addresses were allocated for customers. The 224 to 255, those are the multicast and experimental. Yes, Pamela.
Oh, you fixed it, Rick. I just wondered if you could readjust the screen, but you fixed it. Thank you.
Okay. So this is how they gave out the addresses. If you got an address that started with a 0, really a 1, because 0 was reserved, to 127, really 126, because 127 was reserved, you got what was known as a Class A address. Your address you got had a mask 255.0.0.0/8. So you got a network with 24 bits for the host portion. If you got an address that began with 128 to 191, you didn't actually get that whole 128. You got 128 something, 128, 129 something. You got the first two numbers was your network address. The last two decimal numbers was your host, 16 bits the host. You actually had 65,000 plus addresses. If you got a network address that began with 192 to 223, the first three numbers, first 24 bits, was the network portion of your address. Only the last 8 bits you could use for hosts. So what does this mean? Okay, this means that, first of all, 126 of the blocks of addresses, half the IPv6 addresses, those companies got those 126 minus, some of the ones that were reserved, got half the addresses, 16 million hosts each. Now, for the next group, so about a fourth of the addresses were given out to 16,000 possible networks with 65,000 hosts per network. I'll show you this in a moment. And then the last group got even further divided. Let's take a look at this a little differently. Here's the block. See this group of addresses here? They got what's known as a Class A. Each one of these companies, organizations that got one of these blocks of addresses got the whole /8. Okay, so I want to show one of these, show it in a moment. Like the 7000/8, they got all 16 million addresses. This group here, okay, these blocks were actually further divided into /16 networks of 65,000 hosts each. And this group, these blocks here were broken down, divided even more granularly into /24s. Let's take a look. If you got a network from this group here, you got the whole /8. You got 16 million plus hosts. If you got an address from this here, this is called, by the way, Class A. If you got an address starting from here to here, you got what's known as a Class B address. You didn't get that whole block. So like for 151, you got 151 something. Maybe the 151.200/16. So what you got was 65,000 addresses for your network. So you got one of these subdivided blocks within this block. If you got an address beginning from 192 to 223, for example, 207, you might got you didn't get the whole 207.0.0.0/8. You got 207, you got the first three numbers was your network. So that was divided even more granularly. So you've got a network that the network was the first three numbers, the first 24 bits, and you only had 256 total hosts, 254 usable hosts per network. So either you lucked out and got a whole bunch, or you did pretty good, you got 65,000, or you were one of the many that, didn't get many addresses. This is how it was originally divided up. This is who got what address. Yep. So this is up until 1992, 1993. Okay, how are we doing? This is how the addresses were allocated. This is known as classful IP addressing. Okay, you're the first group to see this, so that's why I keep on asking, how are we doing? Okay, this is a brand new presentation by Rick. All right, so IPv4 addressing, 1981 to 1993, 50% already allocated. Okay, in 1992, the Internet Activities Board, now called the Internet Architecture Board, they kind of are the top group that manages kind of the design and the what do I want to say? Uh, where the internet is going, including protocols, technologies, and that sort of thing. They recognized that we're going to be in trouble. Okay, this TCP/IP protocol suite is becoming popular. People are getting computers at home, and you know, we're gonna run out of addresses. This is when the regional IANA created and the IAB created these 5 regional internet registries that they were going to be now responsible. IANA was going to give the addresses to them, and then these regional internet registries will allocate the IPv4 addresses out to organizations in their geographical area. We'll talk more about them in a moment. And about the same time, they saw this coming, but yeah, that's when how we think many people today think and use the current internet. Okay, this is when Tim Berners-Lee at CERN developed HTML and HTTP, what we think is the World Wide Web. This is where Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina, I think it's pronounced, at National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois Champaign, developed the first web browser to take advantage of what Tim Berners-Lee was doing at CERN. This is what when the internet just exploded, just took off. Everybody was getting on the internet. Okay, so what was the IAB going to do about this? Okay, they had some short-term solutions right here. We'll talk about each one of these briefly. CIDR, NAT, subnetting. Hey, that was not pre-planned in IPv4. Private IPv4 addresses, and the long-term plan is IPv6. CIDR. So this is, let's get rid of these different classes. Talk more about that in a moment. Hey, we can divide it up any way we want. We don't have to give anything going from beginning with a 0 to 128, get a /8 address, 255.0.0.0 mask. No, we divide this stuff up any way we want. NAT said, well, let's allow organizations to translate one address into another, even multiple addresses into one address. Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. Hey, let's standardize this idea of subnetting. I know we all IPv4, not a lot of fun, but hey, let's allow organizations to create their own subnets and then be able to, route within that. Let's create a standard for that, because that wasn't that wasn't built into the original IPv4 protocol. Meanwhile, IPv6, we'll talk more about that next time around. But we also have to create some private IPv4 addresses. That allowed anybody, this is between private IPv4 addressing and NAT is what saved the internet. Or not saved the internet. Rewind. Saved IPv4. Okay, this allows any organization to make use out of any of these address blocks. You can have your own 16 million addresses internally and translate literally thousands of internal private addresses to a single public address. That saved IPv4. Okay. Okay,
You were,
so
oh, sorry, I was just gonna ask you to repeat that last statement about what saved IPv4.
saved IPv4,
Thanks.
all of this really. But how what probably had one of the biggest impacts was the ability to have private IPv4 address space inside. Okay, that is, for example, here's my private IPv4 address here at Cabrllo. Here is my public IP address at Cabrllo. This address here, many, probably hundreds, if not a few thousand devices internally at Cabrllo that have a private address, like me, hundreds or thousands of private addresses internally can be translated going out as a single public IPv4 address. So this allows us to make better use of our public IPv4 addresses. Okay, CIDR. So we had these classes of addresses. Okay, what we did was got rid of this. CIDR is classless interdomain routing. We got rid of this, and what we did is this. Instead of having 3 subnet masks, where you had, either 16 million hosts, 65,000 hosts, or 254 usable hosts. What CIDR did was say, no, let's allow any subnetting to take place. No longer base it on that first octet. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so now anybody can create subnets of any size. The ISPs, the regional internet registries, can subnet their network as they see fit, not based on the first number and whether it's a Class A, Class B, or Class C address. Okay, so basically they took this and they made it look like this. However they want to divide it up. Okay, so we saw that 50% of the addresses were already allocated. Another thing that happened was IANA, I said in about 1992, 1993, they started the idea of forming these regional internet registries, 5 of them. You can see when they started to come into existence. John Postle was part of this, to say, let's give the remaining addresses to these regional internet registries. We got to do this more fairly, okay? Yes, the cat, whatever term you want to use, the cat's already out of the bag. We've already kind of, gave out a lot of these already. We already reserved a lot for multicast and experimental use. We can't really take those back. And there's reasons behind that. I can talk about that later. But for what we've got left, let's try and be a little bit more fair about this, give them out to these regions and let them then allocate them to internet service providers and whoever wants them from there. Okay. All right. So the RIRs can pretty much have a certain degree of autonomy. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you next is how these regional internet registries got them. So what I've got grayed out here is what's already been allocated. Now you're seeing the colors associated with the 5 regional internet registries. And starting in 1992, 1993, this is who got them. Okay. So you can see they started getting allocated to the different regions. There's the IPv4 map and the different areas of the world that were getting them. It's a bigger look, but I'm going to show you a different look at this. Okay. So I've talked about this here. We can see who got them. Okay. We can see who got what addresses. Which regional internet registries got them, where it says allocated over here. That means that this regional internet registry was allocated that block of addresses. Okay, for their control and for them to give out to organizations. Typically, internet service providers, content providers, big companies, okay, they had to pay the regional internet registry for these addresses. Okay. 2011, IANA allocated the last /8 addresses to the 5 regional internet registries. Now, they did, this was there's another date, 2014, that also says they allocated the last addresses. This is when IANA allocated the last addresses they had. Then they took back some of the unused addresses and reallocated those back by 2014. But they were allocated to 5 regional internet registries. So IANA recovered some of the unused ones and reallocated them. And once again, in 2014 said, this is all, this is it, this is all we have. There are no more. We have no more. You have everything you're ever gonna get. Okay, so the 5 regional internet registries, they were giving them out and they started running out. Now, Afrinic still has some. Depends on how you want to look at what have they run out. They are in a phase where they are under very stringent policies internally who gets IPv6 addresses. But yes, Aaron ran out, you know, US Canada 2015, AFNIC 2011, RIPE NCC 2012, LACNIC 2014. Okay. CNIC, which is the ISP for the K-20 school system in California. This is back in 2014, this part here. 2014, they announced that if you are one of our customers, you're a county office of education, a college, a university, community college, Cal State, whatever, and you get address space from us, we are your ISP. You want IPv4 addresses, you're gonna get a /27. Remember, that's a 255, 255, 255. Then what, that's 24, 25, 26, 27, 3 more bits, 224. That means you're gonna get 32 addresses. Public addresses. And by the way, you've got to show that you're going to use 85% of those 32 addresses right now. Okay, it's not a lot, is it? Okay. So now that, you know, now they really just point you at IPv6. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Who got what? So out of the legacy from 1981 to 1993, who got, that's kind of where you see all these white spaces here, okay? And you see some different colors. The purples are the ones that are, were the original legacy, and these other ones too, any of these white ones, but the other ones are, they're still legacy, but they're administered by Aaron. We'll talk about that in a moment. Those are the legacy blocks. Okay. So legacy, the ones that have, I'll just show you how this works. There's no reference to administered by. So if we look up here where it says just legacy right here, okay, that's all it says. And it does not say, now look at this one, this says legacy, but it says administered by. That's different than this one here that says legacy, and it does not say administered by here. Okay. Those were some of the original ones. They retain clear ownership of those addresses. Okay, they're still named as, hey, this is us, not a regional internet registry, us. Okay, Department of Defense, Intel Information Systems. We have this. Ford Motor Company. Okay. All right. How about the ones that say administered by? What are those all about? Let's see, like this here, administered by. Okay. Those were also allocated. Okay, but at some point became under the management and subdivided what was left by the regional internet registries. But those are pretty much given out. But the regional internet registry says we'll manage it. If anybody's giving up their blocks or needs, whatever, we're going to manage this space. There's a lot to be said for having an entire block and not managed by a regional internet registry. That's the highest level of autonomy. Okay, we get to do what we want with our addresses. Okay, we get to do whatever we want. All right. So let's take a look at where we are today. Yes, Pamela.
I was just wondering, those that got the original addresses, like I saw, I think USC and Southern Cal was one of them. Did they ever go back and say, are you not using all of these? Can we have some of them back?
Not to them.
Okay,
To others.
thank you.
Yeah, good question. And I'll talk about USC. That's not USC. It is University of Southern California, but they were heavily involved in some of the early design work of the internet. So where we are out of today, out of these 256 blocks, 35 were assigned to IANA, 92 were legacy. That's 50%. Out of the 256 blocks, 36 blocks belong to Aaron, 45 blocks to AppNet. Now you might say, wow, so RIPE NCC, that's right here. They have more addresses than Aaron? Well, we'll take a look at that in a moment. I'm sorry, AppNet, 45 blocks. RIPE NCC, 35 blocks. AFRINIC, only 4 blocks of addresses. LACNIC, only 9 blocks. Look at the percentages. Okay, 50% were already given out. US and Canada, 14%. I'm going to show this in a different way here in a moment. 18% for AppNet. Actually, I got this. Yeah, I'm going to show this more in a moment. 14% RIPE NCC, 2%, 8%. I got some other ways to show this. Okay, so let's add the legacy. So what I'm doing here is this. These administered by, like Aaron, these are addresses that are usually within that geographical region. So they didn't maybe need as many blocks for the RIRs because the US was doing pretty well with some of these big ISPs and companies. So if we add on the ones that are not just allocated to that regional internet registry, Aaron, but the ones administered by it today, they actually have 111 blocks. Okay, I know where I got that. So let's take a look at when we add in administered by each one of these. So let's just remove we have let's remove, and also let's put the legacy in with where they are. So for example, DOD, this is United States. Okay, so let's put them where they geographically are. Okay, this shows the total number of /8 baskets. Who has what? Aaron, right here, North America, 111. Look at them compared to everybody else. I'm going to show you some percentages here in a moment. Look at AppNic, Asia Pacific area. A lot of people here. Okay. India's in this area. A lot of people. Asia. RIPE NCC. Okay. This includes like China, Middle East, Europe. AFRINIC, another large populated area. LACNIC, another large populated area. Look how few addresses they have. Okay. IANA, let's take away IANA, 14% of the addresses. Now let's look at legacy and everything else. Where are they? The ones allocated to regional internet registries and where the legacies are. Look who has the most addresses. Look who has not nearly as many addresses. Look at this compared to the world population. If you look at Aaron, we have 44% of the addresses, US and Canada. That's almost 5 IP addresses per person. Now look at some of these other areas. Look at APNIC, this area here. They have a much larger population than us, yet they have fewer addresses than us. They basically have one IPv4 address for every 5 people. Look at RIPE NCC, another large population. Basically one IPv4 address for 2 people. It gets worse for the AFRINET. Look at their population, 1.3 billion. Look how many addresses they get compared to the US, with much smaller population. 0.7, one IPv4 address for every 10 people. LACNIC's not much better off, one address for every 5 people. So a lot of inequity here. And also think about what areas of the world are still growing as far as access to the internet. At the business and else, businesses, residents, schools, etc., still gaining access to the internet, needing more access to the internet. Are we okay to keep on going for another 5 or 10 minutes? We good? Okay, you gotta go somewhere, I understand, but I'm gonna continue this. We're almost done. So, Vint Cerf, they saw this in 1992, 1993, and we're going to talk a lot about this on Thursday. He says, so IPv6, you all know that we are almost out of IPv4 address space. This is 2011. I am a little embarrassed about that because I was the guy who decided that 32-bit was enough for an internet experiment. My only defense is that choice was made in 1977. I thought it was an experiment. The problem is the experiment didn't end, so here we are. Now, a couple of things. First of all, of course, he's not to blame for this. Nobody foresaw, what was going to actually, how we were going to be using this internet. The idea that, people didn't even have personal computers yet when this was all being designed. It was early on, it was just the, mainframes and mainframe computers, trying to get them to connect. The other thing too is I want to mention that, and actually I'm going to get there. So I'll get there here in a moment here. I want to talk about why the allocation happened the way it did. Okay, that wasn't because the US, Canada was greedy. Okay, US, okay. Got to remember, nobody cared. Okay. All right. So IPv6 is and we're going to talk more about that on Thursday. Okay. We see that protocol got designed in 1995, 1998. Steve Deering and Robert Hinden. We'll talk more about that on Thursday. That's my little, talk more about that. We've got no choice. I mean, I'm not an evangelist for IPv6. I'm not trying to sell books. I'm not trying to, I'm a realist. Okay, I see these numbers here. Yes, we're all happy here in the US, okay, for the most part. Cabrllo College, okay, but that's not what the rest of the world is facing. Okay, this is a global internet. If we want to participate, be part of a global internet, we got to recognize that, there are disparity. Okay, so let's talk about how this all came about. You got to remember, 1970s. First of all, the ARPANET, which is a predecessor of today's internet, okay, was launched in 1969, involved mostly American academic research and the US government. Okay, it was an experiment funded by the US Department of Defense, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Now, the early ARPANET used something called NCP. Later, and this was all done by, Vint Cerf, Bob Kahn, and many others. Many other companies involved, many other research institutions and all that were involved in building this out. In 1983, they decided, let's move to TCP IP, okay, and IP version 4, okay? Now, as ARPANET grew, the U.S. Department of Defense and other American organizations were the first to receive it. They're the only ones that cared. Nobody else wanted to get involved with this. Europe, OSI was doing their own thing. okay? And IBM was doing their own thing, and there's some others doing their own thing. So nobody was rushing out to get IPv4 addresses, okay? No, and as far as the general population and most companies, they didn't care, okay? They didn't care, okay? So who got the first IPv4 address allocations? So some of the early adopters, and these were the companies that worked on ARPANET. Stanford, that's where, actually Stanford is where Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn were working at the time. USC, Institute for Sciences Institute. Okay, they had a lot to do with IANA and things like that. BBN, who, I got a lot of this coming up here. Okay, Xerox Park, Palo Alto Research Center, DEC, Department of Defense. That's why these companies they were involved. Okay. There was a, slow global spread. Okay. And basically because the rest of the world really didn't care. Okay. Okay. So by the time we had the IPv4, before the rest of the world did care, and TCP IP looked like it was going to become the protocol suite of the internet, which we'll talk about on Thursday, that was not a foregone conclusion. That, then we didn't, there was, half the addresses were already given out. I had another, okay, I guess I have, one second here. This is bugging me. I don't know what happened. I must have put it in the other presentation. I'll talk a little bit more about, I just want to show you a couple of who got what here. Yeah, let me just finish up this a little bit about who got what addresses, if you don't mind. Yeah. Sorry, let me just finish this up a little bit more, give you a little bit more background. Okay. So this is who had a lot of the addresses. Okay. I mentioned a lot of the government agencies, National Science Foundation, Department of Defense. The NSF was the funding source for the early ARPANET. NASA and others. Academic and research institutions, Stanford, that's where Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn were. MIT, they played a large role in a lot of the early development of the internet. USC, ISI, I mentioned that's where John Postel was actually working at. Private companies, AT&T, okay, they got a lot of addresses. Now, they were not a big fan of the ARPANET early on. They didn't think packet switching would work. Okay, they did not even do a request for proposal for when the ARPANET was, they said, hey, who would like to be a part of this? They actually poo-pooed it. They actually said, this isn't gonna work. And I realized, well, I guess we gotta jump in. Same thing with IBM, by the way. Largest computing company in the world. They didn't think this packet switching thing was gonna work either. So they were a little late to the party, but soon enough to get big blocks of addresses. Cisco Systems, okay? They were the leading manufacturer of networking equipment, routers at the time. Sun Microsystems, okay, which contributed a lot to Unix and other networking technologies. Some of the networking companies, BBN, Beranek, and Newman, there we go. They developed the first router, known as an IMP, Information Message Processor. Xerox PARC, which contributed a lot to early protocols. All these people kind of working on a lot of this protocol stuff with TCP IP. Network service providers, some of the early ones, UUNet, and John remembers them, I know. They were heavily involved. MCI, who's no longer, they were huge, and then they just had some big financial issues happening. International organizations back in early 1990s, these were starting to be developed, RIPE and NCC. Okay, so these were a lot of the early developers, a lot of the people that were involved early. We're going to come back to all this in a moment, next week. So this is where all the IPv4 addresses went. Okay, so the US got an early start and a large share. When I say the US, I mean the companies, universities, government agencies and stuff, because that's came out of ARPA Day. It was, nobody else cared, too. You gotta remember, nobody else cared about this. Okay, so it's not like they would keep making this a secret. There were other competing protocol suites. So, but this early dominance in the allocation, and maybe dominance is, early large allocation, has now had long-lasting effects. Because now we have this global imbalance, which was not done for any reason, but it just, how it all happened. So that's why now we got to talk about on Thursday what happened next. Now IPv6 became the next internet protocol. That was not a foregone conclusion either, by the way. And why it's taking so long. And where are we today? Has something changed? Is something changing? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. And not just my opinion. All right? How we doing?
All
good.
good.
Good? Okay. So anyway, you can see I'm excited about this. Okay? Because even with what we just talked about here, a lot of people they just know that they went away. They're not, but now you get a little inside look, analysis of what actually happened. And unless you live those days, nobody really cares. Maybe you shouldn't have to care, but you need to understand, why we're at the point we are and why there is, IPv6, there's no plan B, okay, except IPv4, continuing IPv4. All right, I'll let you go. Thanks for hanging out with me. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks. Good seeing everybody.